What is going on, guys? We are on week 3 of being in quarantine. I'm here, as you guys know, in my nice little gains dungeon. And today I'm going to do a nice little informative video for you guys as I work my way through editing and trying to fine-tune and smooth out the arch bench press video for you guys. So I know the anticipation sucks. I know you guys are eager for it. I am eager to post it, but I want to make sure that I'm covering everything, I'm giving accurate demonstrations, and that the order and flow of the video is very coherent. So, leading up to that point, you guys will be getting training videos, and you'll be getting informative videos. And today, what I want to do for you guys, because people always ask me, and I know there are a lot of people on social media who are like, I get asked this a lot, blah, blah, blah. No, I literally get asked this all the fucking time. What do you do to warm up for lower body days? And it changes every day. It changes every day. There are some days where my warm-up is longer. There are some days where my warm-up is really short. Now, that all depends on my general level of preparedness coming into a workout, and that could depend on the amount of sleep I've gotten, the amount of moving around I've done, fatigue from sessions prior. There are all different factors that play a role into this. And what I do before every training session, before I start warming up, is I kind of go through a little movement scan. I start moving around, I go through certain positions, and I try to figure out where I'm really lacking. And sometimes it's very obvious based on pain or stiffness that you can feel just making slight little movements. You know, I'm sure some of you have had a crazy deadlift day, your back is sore, or, you know, a squat day where your knees are sore, or maybe your hips are stiff and you can't really sit into the bottom of the squat, whatever it might be, right? There's always things that you can pick out immediately, but then there are some other more nuanced things that require a little bit more scanning, right? So obviously I'm not gonna go through this whole process for you guys. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna show you 5 exercises that I do to warm up that are pretty much, you know, if you were to aggregate like an average day of warming up for me, this is what it would probably be. And I'm gonna break it down for you by categories. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna describe it to you as there is a low threat, low threshold portion of my warm-up. There is a higher threat part of my warm-up. And then there is the more dynamic movement-based part of my warm-up. And what I mean by that is the first stage is really focused on awareness and breathing, and focus on managing positions in an environment where the threat is low. And I say threat, what do I mean by threat? Essentially putting yourself in a position where there isn't substantial load challenging any sort of positions or movement patterns. So I might be laying on my back during a movement, or I might have my back up against the wall, right? These are low threat. Essentially, there is nothing really challenging the positions that you're trying to create, so you can literally just focus on the awareness of them. Then what we do, what we'll call step 2, is the higher level of awareness, higher threat version or progression of some of those earlier regressions, which essentially will combine certain ranges of motion with the positions that we're trying to maintain through those ranges of motion. So there is more challenge to maintain those positions or be aware of your positioning. So, for example, I might be doing a split squat hold, let's say, or for upper body, it might be a foam roller push-up, right? There are movements where now we are trying to integrate something we learned early on into a more high-level movement. Then the third part of this, we'll call step 3, is just the more dynamic phase. It becomes more comp-specific, right? So it's gonna be squatting movements, deadlifting movement, trying to move through a very similar pattern to what you would be doing on the competition squat, but perhaps you are trying to emphasize a certain movement or range of motion, you know, access to a range of motion that you were previously lacking when you came into this morning's workout feeling super stiff or whatever it might have been. So I'm gonna get into this warm-up for you guys, and while I'm doing everything, I'll give a brief explanation, and then I'll probably have some, you know, some cues just to keep in mind on the screen as you guys are seeing the raw footage of me performing them. So let's get to it. What is going on, guys? Here we go. Exercise number 1 of the stage 1 of my warm-up, and this is going to be a perfect example of what I was talking about when it comes to having an exercise that is low threat and a bit of a regression where we can just focus on the awareness of our positioning at very little risk. And that is going to be the 90-90 Hemibridge. And the great thing about the 90-90 Hemibridge is, as I said, it is very low threat, which at the start of a warm-up is fantastic because we want to just calm things down, kind of dull out all the noise, and be able to focus on each individual portion of the movement that we want to, that can hopefully be transferable into a higher level warm-up, and then eventually our competition lifts. If we have the context and awareness at a low level, eventually over time we'll be able to take it into a higher level movement. Now, this exercise will not alone fix anybody's problems, although I have to much success seen it help with a lot of pain and discomfort that lifters have had alone. But we need to be able to do something at a low level before we can progress it to a high level. So it's all stepping stones. The great thing about this exercise is it's going to give lifters a very, very good awareness of their ability to inhale and exhale to control the diaphragm. It's going to give them a good understanding of the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis, and it's going to let them know how to integrate both together, which is going to be super important for good positioning on squats and deadlifts. So you'll learn from the bottom side how important the adductors, hamstrings, and glutes are for keeping the pelvis out of an overly anteriorly rotated position. It's also going to be helpful to know how to use the abs and obliques and your inhale and exhaling patterns to keep the rib cage rotated down, integrated well with the pelvis, and then be able to descend your diaphragm during these movements. So I'm gonna get into the movement right now. I'm gonna talk through my step-by-step, and then I'm gonna show you a full run through without me talking, and I'll have some cues up on the screen. So first thing you're gonna need is a box or a bench or whatever you might have that allows you to establish a 90-degree angle at the hips and a 90-degree angle at the knees. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to fucking relax. I'm going to sink into the floor. I'm going to become aware of my breathing. I'm going to become perceptive to the sound around me. I am just going to be calm. And I think that is the part of these types of movements that many powerlifters mess up, because so many powerlifters are used to just produce all this force, tension everywhere, right? And it creates a lot of noise in the system. It doesn't allow you to actually calm down, focus on a specific area. It's just full body global tension. And then when pains or discomforts or any sort of demand to identify a specific origin of something, you lose that perceptibility. So the first thing you need to do is just fucking relax. And just breathe normally, just breathe. Okay. The next thing you're gonna do is you're going to dig your heels into the surface with about 50% force. And you're gonna notice when you do that, you're gonna feel your hammies light up a little bit, right? Because the hamstring's function is going to be as a knee flexor. Part of the hamstring's job is to flex the knee. So by pulling down in this box, it would be as if I were doing a hamstring curl. Obviously I can't because there is a box there. So I'm digging the heels in about 50% intensity. Try to keep the toes in a kind of relaxed position. So don't curl them up so much that your tibialis anterior is on fire, and then don't have them so far forward that your calves are on fire. So just relax, dig the heels in, feel those hammies going. The next thing I want you to do is kind of get an awareness of your rib cage and your breathing. So what you want to do now is I want you to give a big inhale through your nose, take it in through your lungs, take it into the back. You want to feel your back, or rather the reciprocal force of the ground on your back as you inhale, right? If I'm filling up with air in the back, theoretically the floor should be pushing back against me with an equal and opposite force. Newton's third law. Shout out to all my people who have taken physics. Inhale through your lungs, and now I want you to exhale like you're blowing out a candle on the ceiling. As you exhale, you're gonna feel something pretty interesting happen. You're gonna feel your rib cage descend toward your pelvis. You're gonna feel it internally rotate, and you're gonna feel it rotate downward. You're gonna also feel your abs and obliques, because those are what are pulling it down. And it's gonna feel like everything is just kind of driving down toward your hips. So big inhale and exhale. Try to be incredibly complete with that exhale. Try to inhale fully and exhale fully. You can exhale for way longer than you think you can. So if you're doing this and going, that's not an exhale. Blow out that candle for as long as you can. You're gonna feel your rib cage has rotated down. You're gonna feel your abs and obliques, hopefully, as you have no air out. Obviously I'm talking so I have air in, but you get the point. The next thing I'm going to do is while exhaling, while all that air is exhaled out, I'll go back to normal breathing. But what I want to do is focus on keeping those abs and obliques on to keep that rib cage rotated down. I did that initial breath to give you the context and awareness of what kind of positioning of the rib cage we want during this. We don't want it flared up, we don't want it arched back. We want to keep it rotated down. The next thing I'm going to do, continuing to flex my hamstrings, I'm going to flex my glutes like I'm trying to peel my butt off of the ground. So I'm going to get a little more oomph from the hamstrings. Maybe I go from 50% to 70%, and my knees are going to elevate a little bit because my pelvis, my sacrum, is rotating posteriorly off the ground. By using my hamstrings and glutes, I am able to posteriorly rotate the pelvis. For those of you who don't know, the hamstrings don't just flex the knee, they also help with a posterior rotation of the pelvis, right? So it should feel like my butt is curling off the ground. I'm going to curl it off the ground while keeping my lower back fully intact and my rib cage rotated down completely. At this point, my hamstrings are fucking lit up. Absolutely lit up. My ribs are rotated down, and now here comes the exercise. Yes, this is the start of the exercise. I'm gonna take a big inhale like I discussed before, in through the nose, fill up the lungs, fill up the back. Take that full exhale, drive it toward the ceiling like I'm trying to blow out a candle, all right? During this, flex those hammies as hard as you can, flex those glutes, keep that pelvis rotated posteriorly underneath you, keep those abs and obliques on. During the exhale, you should be flexing everything significantly hard. Then when you inhale again, same thing. There is never any point in this exercise where you should be relaxed. The entire purpose is to keep everything on and go through this breathing pattern. Learn how to control your air in these positions. Learn how to use these positions to help your ability to control air. You'll notice that while doing this, your air will feel like it's going toward different places than if you're just standing up normally, right? Our position dictates the pressure and the distribution of air throughout our body, which ultimately is going to play a role in how we move, all right? So, we're gonna go through this for like 3 to 4 sets of 4 to 5 full breaths, okay? So I'm gonna inhale. Always end on an inhale. So we're still in stage 1 right now. This is moving out of the sagittal plane into the frontal plane, and this is going to be a side lying knee to knee. So this is kind of similar. There are some key principles that we take from the 90-90 that are also, you want to, you know, implement them during this movement as well, but obviously we're in the frontal plane, and now we're trying to get these adductors going a little bit more. So to decide which hip you would do this on, you would need to first figure out which hip you lack internal rotation on. But for those of you who have felt groin pain on a certain hip, right? You hit the bottom of a squat and you feel like this kind of impingement on the inside of your groin, or you feel like it's being stretched and kind of burning as you squat. You might be lacking internal rotation on that hip. Your external rotators of the hip might be doing too much work. Your adductors might be too lengthened and not doing enough work. That hamstring, that medial hamstring also might not be doing its job very well. Your ability to control that internal oblique might not be great. There's all these different things that can come into play. But for those of you who don't want to dive down into why all of these things are happening, you just know, ouch, my adductor hurts, my groin hurts, I have trouble hitting depth on this hip, you know, it's uncomfortable in the bottom, it feels like I'm kind of hitting a wall. That is the hip you want down during the side-lying knee to knee. So similar to the side-lying 90, or to the 90-90 Hemibridge, I'm going to get into this side-lying position, 90-degree angle at the hips, 90-degree angle at the knees. The first thing I'm going to do is with that top hip, I'm going to translate, meaning move the femur forward. So I'm going to glide that femur forward. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to abduct, meaning use my glute max to externally rotate, okay? And now this is my starting position right here. My right glute max is on fire. This femur is in front of this femur. And now what I'm gonna do is with that left adductor, I'm gonna give myself some support here with my right arm. I'm going to try to drive my left knee toward my right knee. As you guys can see, I can't do it. It's kind of hard for me. Don't be discouraged if you can't really get any movement. If like you can only do this, fuck it. Keep doing sets like that. Treat it as an exploratory phase where you're like, okay, this is what this feels like. I'm just going to try to get the most out of this limited range that I have. And as sets progress, as days progress, as months progress, you'll get better at it and you'll hopefully restore some control of that adductor that's been giving you trouble. Drive that knee forward. Keep those obliques on. Abduct. Drive up. Same breathing cycle, same number of sets and reps. 3 to 4 sets, 4 to 5 reps. Only do it on the side where the adductor is bugging you or you feel like you've had groin discomfort before.
Now remember, if you don't need a warm-up, don't do it. Meaning if there's a certain drill that you see people doing, you don't need to do it unless there is a demand for you to perform it. I know tons of powerlifters who need that 90-90. I know tons of powerlifters who need this. So while this is part of my warm-up, just also be perceptive. Be a critical thinker about whether or not this suits you. Because in reality, you might need that 90-90, but you might not need this, and all you need after 90-90 is just, you know, blood flow, right? You just need to get warm, get your core body temperature up, and go through the movements that are more specific to your competition movements. But some of us, we need more to be able to lift pain-free, to be able to lift through the range of motions that are deemed a good lift in powerlifting. So just be aware of that.
All right, we are moving on to the phase 2, which is taking concepts from the previous regressions and implementing in a more demanding way. So we have established a pretty solid understanding of what it means to control the rib cage and the pelvis. We've established a pretty good breathing pattern here. And now I'm gonna take this movement and progress it into a more statodynamic movement in the glute bridge isometric hold, or a glute bridge. We can do statodynamic hip pumps with it. So I'm sure many of you have done glute bridges before, but I'm sure many of you continue to extend at the pelvis way too much instead of using your hamstrings and glutes to achieve hip extension. So what I might start off with, if I'm having a hard time getting full hip extension, which as you guys can clearly see, I am. My hip extension is not great. Theoretically, I should be in a perfectly straight line right now, but I can't get there. So what I might do to start off is I might just go through pulses like I was doing during the 90-90 Hemibridge. So I might go through squeezing my glutes and my hamstrings to posteriorly rotate the pelvis for sets, right? So I might not be able to go into a full glute bridge, but what I'll do here is I'm essentially gaining familiarity with the range of motion through which I can competently move for the time being. Once I get to the point where I can actually extend into a full glute bridge iso, I can hold that for sets, still focusing on digging my heels in, still focusing on keeping my abs on to keep my ribs rotated down, and that'll probably look something like this. What I can do to make this even harder is I can do this single leg. And for those of you who might have, you know, let's say you have patellar tendonitis or patellar tendinopathy, whatever you want to call it, depending on how severe it is or how long it's been continuing. Usually, as I mentioned, what can be the cause of this tendinopathy or knee patellar tendonitis? Of course, it's multifactorial. We've discussed this. I've mentioned my theory of, or rather my hypothesis of the stress exposure. I'll call it like a stress exposure model,
whereby, you know, a lifter can accumulate a certain amount of stress to an area that will ultimately cause pain or discomfort. But there's also a certain amount of stress per exposure that a lifter can incur, which can be based on more positional type stuff. Meaning, okay, I'm doing this movement, it hurts a lot on my knee. Okay, positionally we can look at it and say, okay, why the fuck is there so much stress being diverted to the knee? There's a video that Dr. Jordan Shallow has where he's like, okay, why is so much stress being diverted to the fucking adductor? Like, let's actually tackle this, right? It's more than just, oh, you're exposed to stress. We need to reduce the number of exposures you have. Like, yeah, no shit. If you're not exposed to a certain stress, then you're not going to experience the pain. It's like the meme where the doctor's like, or the patient is like, it hurts when I do this, and the doctor's like, well, don't do it. It's like, yeah, of course, if you're not exposed to it, you're not going to experience it. But the thing is, for you to progress, there might be, right? You might have this threshold for pain and exposure. So past this threshold, you start to experience discomfort. But there might be a threshold needed for progress that is above your threshold for discomfort. And there are critical thinking, you know, measures that we can do to make this threshold for discomfort higher so that you can actually continue to make progress, right? So if you're somebody who's experiencing knee pain, it could be a result of the positioning during your squat. It could be a result of doing too much volume. It could be a result of doing too much volume with the position that you're squatting in. It could also be due to, you know, you might have really low tone hamstrings, meaning that they're just super long, and you're not able to control the pelvis effectively. You might be super extended, going back to what I was saying about your positioning. So being able to really, really tackle your hamstrings' ability to control the knee and control the pelvis during your warm-up can drastically help reduce discomfort you feel while squatting. So me personally, I have a terrible time loading my left hip. There are so many factors I can go over. I had a ruptured ligament in my left foot. Going from the foot up, that obviously is going to make things a lot more difficult. I used to play baseball and was a righty, so I was loading the right hip significantly more. And then as an effect, right, my left side of my rib cage is much more extended. My left side of my pelvis is more extended. I lack internal rotation on the left hip, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. This is troubleshooting and critical thinking I've done myself. So for somebody like you who might be experiencing that left knee pain, I could do these glute bridge holds or my, you know, tucked pelvis holds with just one leg at a time. It's going to be significantly harder, but we're able to actually be more specific and tackle the specific problem. So for me, I do a lot of these. I'm going to be doing these holds for like 30 seconds on one hip versus both hips. I have no problem loading this right leg, and usually the stronger you get, the more outside of the sagittal plane and the more outside of just bilateral exercises you have to get. There's going to be a lot of stuff that helps early on, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that is going to help more beginner to intermediate lifters. But as you get really strong and these compensations become more deeply rooted and protected, there's going to be more drastic interventions you have to do to get there. So this would be my progression of a regression, because the regression doesn't do as much for me anymore.
So the exercise I'm going to do now in the frontal plane is going to be adductor side planks, Copenhagen side planks, whatever you want to call them. And the way that's going to look, for those of you who can't do it with a straight leg, you're going to make a 90-90 and put the inside of the knee up here, squeeze up, and drive the hips forward while still keeping the pelvis neutral. Squeeze that left glute forward hard and try to stay in a perfectly straight line. For those of you who can progress this further, you can do it with a straight leg, or going in between, you can do it with a straight leg, but just put your leg up where it's anchored higher. And the stronger and more difficult you want to make it, you can back yourself up off of it until you're just supporting yourself pretty much by your ankle, okay? But most people, I would say, to start, probably need to do it bent leg, drive the hips perfectly forward, squeeze up. That's all there is really to it. Just flex that oblique. Obviously it's a side plank, so you're gonna feel your obliques to keep you up. Do that 3 to 4 sets, 20 to 30 seconds. Nothing crazy, but you'll definitely feel like you have a lot more adductor control during your lower body movements. Okay, so taking some of the lessons from the 90-90 Hemibridge and now putting them into a more high demand, high threat movement. I'm gonna be doing a front foot elevated split squat, and I'm going to implement pauses at the bottom, but I'll ultimately be going through reps. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a 5-second tempo to descend, hold it for 3 seconds, and then come back up, and I'm gonna do that on both legs. And I'm going to try to implement all of the things that I spoke about, right? Pelvis, hamstrings on, tuck it underneath us. Rib cage, pop it back, right? Pop it back behind the midline. Like if you saw Jenga pieces and you had one piece sticking way out, take that piece, right? Push it back. Same with the rib cage. Abs and obliques, take it back over the heels. Flex those hamstrings. Maintain that relationship the entire split squat. So, like I said, pelvis, rotate it underneath us. Keep the knee over the midline. We don't want to be driving crazy external rotation during this. It's a split squat. 1, 2, 3, up. Same thing on the other leg. You can do this for sets, probably 2 to 3 sets. You really probably only need 2 sets of 6 to 8 reps. And I'm gonna show you from the side in a second. So, like I said, go through that checklist, right? Exhale all that air out. Rib cage rotates down, diaphragm descends, abs and obliques on. Flex those hamstrings. So like I said, digging the heels. Dig that front heel, right? Dig that front heel to get that hammy on. Now the pelvis is rotated under me, and I'm gonna squat straight down. I'm gonna do this with the other leg. Hamstring on, tuck that pelvis, rib cage back. Up. One thing to keep in mind, if you are somebody dealing with patellar tendonitis, it might help to do isometrics of these. Long hold isometrics help with tendon health and tendonitis. So, if I am having issues, right, with my patellar tendon, it might help to do long holds of this. Sometimes as long as 30 seconds, and you might experience some serious, what's the word I'm looking for? Analgesic, anesthetic relief. Fucking that up. I'll put it I'll put a little title box over that to correct whatever I'm saying. Okay guys, like I said, so there are gonna be 3 stages to this. Stage 1 was gonna be the lower threat, lower demand versions of the exercises, the 90-90 Hemibridge, the Sidelying Knee to Knee. Then I progressed things further along, the Adductor Side Planks, the Glute Bridge ISOs, the split squats, and then now we take things into a more dynamic movement prep, right? So things get more specific. So if I had kettlebells, I would probably be doing a double front rack kettlebell. I don't have that right now. What I'm gonna be doing now is just a heels elevated goblet squat. So taking the same positions into account, what I'm probably gonna do to get more elevation here is I'm gonna take this plate, just give myself a little bit more wedge of a heel, and I'm just gonna squat, right? And this is like kind of glorified blood flow work, but I'm still reinforcing the patterns that I want to maintain. And when I'm not underneath a bar and don't have to sacrifice the integrity of my thorax as much like I would with a low bar squat, I can really kind of reinforce getting good hip flexion and hip internal rotation because my pelvis isn't being as challenged as when I get underneath the bar and start squatting. So I'm able to actually keep a pure, squatty squat pattern and allow my knees to track forward, keep my pelvis kind of underneath me, and it's gonna look a lot prettier, right, than if I were underneath, 500, 600 pounds right now. So that, body weight squats, dumbbell RDLs, all that sort of stuff falls under that stage 3 umbrella of just general movement prep. And at this point, you can hear me, I'm kind of out of breath already, right? At this point, you should already feel pretty warm if you were diligent about all of these drills that you were doing before. But if you don't feel it yet and you just need more blood flow, obviously go through ranges of motion that are specific to your competition lifts, but not enough load to cause fatigue before lifting. I hope you guys enjoy this video. I wanted to be really informative and give you guys an idea of exactly how I warm up before lifting. As you guys can see, it can take a lot of time if you're deliberate with it, just because there are a lot of moving parts, but in reality, it's not very complex. And we're not chasing, I need to be doing more movements, or I need to be doing every movement in the book to have a good warm-up, right? It's all need-based. And for me, really trying to shorten these hamstrings and adductors and keep my pelvis out of extension are super, super helpful for me to be able to squat well and squat pain-free. And it's the reason that I haven't had any real powerlifting injuries. Obviously I've had, you know, some accidents, but in terms of overuse pains or anything like that, I haven't really had too many issues, so I'm thankful for that. And I think had I not learned a lot of the stuff I've learned about movement prep, I might not be in that same boat. So I hope you guys can take away a lot of lessons from this. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Remember, no bad days, and I will see you guys in the next video, which will be maybe the bench press arch video. Maybe I'll pump out a video before that, who knows. But I'm gonna get to squatting now, and I feel fantastic. So I promise you, this warm-up stuff, it fucking works.